this working? Okay. Thanks for inviting me, you guys. Who has recently been to the homepage of the World Coffee Research website? Okay, can you remember what the first thing you saw was? The future of coffee. If you click on the Our Work tab, you'll find this. Coffee is at risk. They say that the livelihoods of coffee farmers and the businesses that rely on them are threatened by the following things: climate change, low yields, diseases and pests, barriers to quality. In addition to the things threatening coffee, I would like to add one today: price. We all know that the C is currently under $1. We don't have to be a trader to know it anymore either, because our friends and colleagues, coffee buyers, roasters, baristas, etc., are posting about it on Instagram. Here's an example from a roaster in Vancouver who posted this the day it dropped below $1. I don't know if you can read that, but it says, "A lot of specialty roasters don't see the C market as applying to them. A lot of producers do. A lot of roasters buy spot coffees with a differential tacked onto the C market. Today is a busy selling day for some importers, a busy buying day for many roasters. Most of us build our business on cheap blenders or cheap single origin espressos. Most retailers want the best cheap coffee they can find, then buy a few top shelf coffees to fluff up the menu. Many roasters claim transparency by opening the books, but don't quantify how many bags, containers, were sub $3. Many producers are being asked to offer cheaper blenders, replant, renovate, drop price. Most roasters say, we work closely with producers. How close? Many producers can't pay a living wage for farm labor. The C market hit $1 today. Some of you may have also heard that it was also below $1 in the 1970s. Of course, the only difference being that $1 in the 1970s is worth about $4.50 today, meaning that even though on the surface the price was the same, it was essentially 4.5 times higher then. It dipped below $1 again briefly in the early and late 80s, remaining there through most of the 90s and then again in the early 2000s. Since $1 is worth more every time it dips below its own threshold, you could argue that the price of coffee has steadily been getting cheaper. And while some more mechanized farmers' cost of production may have gotten cheaper due to advancements in technology, the reality is that those of small artisanal farmers, some 25 million around the world, have not. In Colombia, where the highest costs of farming coffee is picking, labor gets more expensive every season. In fact, unlike the price of coffee, it increases in relation to inflation, and the government raises the minimum wage every year to make sure that employees are at least earning enough to keep up with the ever-increasing costs of living. Of course, not all farmers pay their pickers minimum wages or cover the benefits that employers are legally required to cover in Colombia. But then again, how can they when the price doesn't allow them to make a minimum wage either? I've been going to a lot of conferences about sustainability in coffee recently, and every time I go, people talk about one of two things. And those are either that you have to increase productivity or you have to increase price. Let me show you something about productivity in Colombia. Even if you doubled farmers' productivity, at the current prices, most farmers wouldn't break the national poverty line. Nor would they if they tripled it and produced more than your average farmer in Brazil. In fact, they'd just lose more money. Since these calculations were made based on the Colombian Coffee Federation's newest cost study, which they conducted with 2,000 farmers over the course of the past 3 years, let's see what it would look like if we took the average price for the past 3 years too, before the C fell below $1. So you'd lose less money. Here's the study, by the way. Why is this the case? That no matter how much you increase productivity, you don't necessarily increase profitability. Let's assume that prices were higher and your margins weren't negative. Here's why most prices, even when they're higher, aren't enough to shelter Colombian farmers from the risk of falling below the poverty line. It's because most farms are small. So it's definitely not a question of just getting farms to produce more, it's also a question of price. And if you're talking about specialty, I strongly believe that there's a threshold where productivity begins to clash with quality, making it harder to produce a product that can fetch a better price. So there's a balance, and currently we don't know what it is. That being said, what do we know? Every day we buy coffee from people. Even if you're not a coffee buyer or even the owner of a cafe, you probably buy a cup of coffee which was produced by someone. Someone with a real level of productivity who's going to receive a real price for their coffee, regardless of whether or not you know what that price is. When I first got to Colombia in 2010, I didn't know anything about trading coffee. The guy I was traveling with knew a little bit more about business than I did, but he wasn't a trader either. So when we got invited to go to a farm and see what it was like to take freshly picked cherry and turn it into parchment coffee, only to dump it into a huge pile of parchment from neighboring farms, all for a price neither the farmer nor his neighbors could explain, we thought it could be interesting to figure out what made certain coffees good and worthy of being separated out from that pile. Since we weren't experienced in trading or very knowledgeable of the C market, we decided to study farmers' costs of production. Assuming the coffees were good and we could find a market for them, we would pay something that took those costs into account. Okay, we're gonna get a little bit technical for a second, but we have time to go through this and ask questions in the end as well. Try to go slow and be really clear. In Colombia, the FNC, or National Colombian Coffee Growers Federation, publishes a reference price which cooperatives receive when delivering their coffee to them for exportation. Not long ago, the FNC exported all of Colombia's coffee. What you see here is the FNC's combination of the C price, the Colombian peso to US dollar exchange rate, and what's known as the Colombian diff, or differential, which is essentially the cents per pound that the market is willing to pay above the C price for Colombia's average quality. Based on these factors, they published the highest possible price for parchment coffee in pesos, as that is what the majority of Colombia's farmers sell.